Breaking news. Erdogan of Turkey has stated that Ukraine should be allowed to join NATO. Russia has said it is keeping a close eye on the talks between Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. This week, Zelensky traveled to NATO member states in an effort to gain support for Ukraine's membership in advance of next week's NATO summit in Lithuania. The Ukrainian government absolutely deserves membership in NATO, according to Erdogan. During a joint press conference, Zelensky expressed his delight at Turkey's support for Ukraine's membership bid. Zelensky said he needs a clear signal that Ukraine will be in the alliance during his visit to the Czech Republic this week. He made this statement on Thursday. "It's not just that the door is open for us, Ukraine will be inside. If a country expresses interest in joining NATO, it will be invited to join if it demonstrates that it can and will adhere to the principles outlined in the North Atlantic Treaty. However, according to the rules for accession, any current member can object to an incoming country joining." Eastern European allies, who are geographically closer to Ukraine and Russia, have pushed for a clearer path for Kyiv to join the defensive alliance once hostilities end. Others in authority have voiced concern that rushing Ukraine into NATO membership would be a highly risky gamble for the alliance, even if it leads to a cessation of hostilities, given Russia's continued territorial claims in eastern Ukraine. Earlier this year, Turkey removed its objections to Finland's NATO membership, but it has not done the same for Sweden. Chilling hostilities. Since February 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Erdogan has become an important power broker, mediating between Moscow and Kiev. He negotiated the Black Sea grain deal that prevented a worldwide famine by freeing millions of metric tons of wheat trapped by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Erdogan on Saturday indicated his support in extending the agreement, and he mentioned that Russian President Vladimir Putin would be visiting Turkey next month. The current agreement is set to expire in 10 days. "We have listened to Ukraine, especially with regards to prisoner exchanges. We are keeping an ear on Russia as well." Erdogan. "I spoke with Mr. Putin, and we will be able to discuss it again next month when Mr. Putin visits Turkey. We'll have a phone conversation about it until then. The prisoner swaps are also very important to us. We're keeping our fingers crossed that something can be done about this, too." Alongside the Turkish president, Zelensky argued that the Black Sea ought to be a zone of safety, rather than a site of so-called frozen conflicts. "It is very important that we start working with our partners to ensure that the existence of the grain corridor and, therefore, the lives of other people," Zelensky said on Saturday, referring to the president of the Russian Federation. "The existence of the grain corridor and, therefore, the lives of other people," Erdogan said, "on other continents, including Africa and Asia." This comes after Russia's Kremlin stated that it would be keeping a close eye on Ukraine and Turkey's negotiations. "Naturally, we will keep a close eye on how these talks pan out." Dmitry Peskov, a spokesman for the Kremlin, said on Friday that the two countries continue to value their constructive partnership relations with Ankara. "What Mr. Erdogan and Mr. Zelensky talk about will be of great interest to us. Indeed, it is crucial." Peskov continued by saying that Putin and Erdogan are in constant contact, and that Erdogan should be commended for mediating between Moscow and Kyiv. Vladimir Putin's presidency in Russia is in its final days. There will be more autocrats in power after him, including in Hungary, Turkey, and Israel. It will take time, but in the end, the progressive democratic principles on which the United States was founded will have triumphed. Putin was selected by then Russian President Boris Yeltsin and later elected by the Duma to enter national politics in 1999. "I was working at the time in Russia, and I saw firsthand how enthusiastic the population was about their new leader. Like them, he was just an average Joe who was ashamed of his country's tarnished image and critical of the way in which the oligarchs and robber barons had privatized most state enterprises." Putin, a shrewd Machiavellian, consolidated his power and popularity rapidly by increasing pensions, investing in economic growth, punishing oligarchs, declaring his desire for a stronger Russia, and working with the West. Even less obvious were his investments in the private army, the Wagner Group, and its leader and former Putin ally, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who mutinied against him after their failed invasion of Ukraine in 2022. This failure led to the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula in 2013 and the invasion of that country in 2022. A few days passed before Putin addressed the Russian and international public, despite the fact that the mutiny had been quickly resolved and he had kept his office. And when he did, he talked as fast as a machine gun, avoided eye contact, and came across as timid and unsure. Many people, however, only noticed the emperor with no clothes. Despite their differences, autocrats like Viktor Orban of Hungary, Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey, and Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel all face a similar decline. After taking office in 2010, Orban gradually eroded Hungary's democratic institutions, instituted anti-immigration policies, alienated himself from the more liberal members of the European Union, and refused to join them in supporting the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. When Hungary became a democracy in the fall of 1989, I saw jubilation on the streets of Budapest. Orban and his party may still have some public support, but he could lose it just as quickly as Putin has gained it. Before becoming president in 2017, Erdogan served as Prime Minister of Turkey for a long period of time. Because his Conservative Justice and Development Party failed to win over 50% of the vote in the May election, he was forced to endure the disgrace of a runoff. He might be kicked out the next time around, or even sooner. Netanyahu has been prime minister on and off since 1996, during which time he has amassed the power and ties to other parties necessary to form coalition governments, taken bribes for which he is currently on trial, and championed a judicial overhaul that could help in his eventual acquittal. After spending a good chunk of my life in Israel, I've seen the country devolve into an autocratic, theocratic democracy, to the point where hundreds of thousands of Israelis have been taking to the streets every weekend for the past 22 weeks to voice their disapproval. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who recently called for civil disobedience against Netanyahu's plan, was among the prominent figures and military leaders who participated in the protests. Netanyahu has moderated his position as a result, but he may still be defeated in the upcoming vote. Autocratic leaders like Putin, Orban, Erdogan, and Netanyahu are on the decline. Several former Soviet countries and President Xi Jinping of China are monitoring these events and planning their responses. The recent meeting between U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Xi exemplifies this shift from a pessimistic to an optimistic view of the United States. It's impossible to say how these tyrants will fall from power, but the tide has turned. Former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro is one example of a leader who was removed from office in a controversial manner and then barred from seeking re-election for many years. Together, these trends point to a gradual erosion of autocracies in favor of Western democracies led by the United States. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine made this more likely by highlighting the divide between governments supporting and those that opposing freedom and the rule of law. It appears that more and more people would rather live as "we the people" than as "we the subjects." In 1776, our forefathers set a new standard by establishing this inclination. More nations and individuals are now engaged in the struggle. Former Dean of the College of Business at the University of Texas at the Pan American, Avraham Shama has served in this role before. He retired as a professor from the University of New Mexico's Anderson School of Management. The new book, Cyberwars: David Knight Goes to Moscow, was released by Third Coast Books.